You know, so many companies pour a ton of time and money into scenario planning. They build these incredible, detailed visions of the future. And then, nothing. Crickets. In this explainer, we're going to dig into why this super important strategic tool almost always falls flat. And here's a little secret. It has absolutely nothing to do with how good your scenarios actually are. All right, let's just get right to the heart of it. I want you to ask yourself this question, and be honest. When was the last time you were in a meeting and heard someone say, hey, that signal we were tracking just happened, which means scenario B is now way more likely. We need to move $20 million from project A over to project B today. Right. For most of us, the answer is, well, never. Instead, what you probably hear is something like this. It's that classic corporate hedge, right? Oh yeah, we have scenarios, but the big money decisions, they just follow the annual budget we set 9 months ago. The scenarios are just kind of there. They're basically decorations.
And that leads us to a really uncomfortable truth, one that a lot of strategy folks don't like to talk about. As a tool that's meant to drive real, agile decisions, scenario planning almost always fails. So look, if you're feeling that frustration, I want you to know you are not alone. This is actually the norm.
Now, the first place our minds go is to blame the work itself. We think, maybe our analysis just wasn't deep enough, or shoot, maybe we just missed a key trend. But that is totally the wrong way to look at it. The people doing this analysis are usually brilliant, and the scenarios themselves, they're often rock solid. The real problem is hiding somewhere else entirely. So here it is, the main point of this whole explainer. Your scenario planning fails because the organizational infrastructure, the plumbing of your company, is broken. This isn't an analysis problem. It's a systems problem. The scenarios are living on a deserted island, completely cut off from how your company actually sees the world and, more importantly, how it makes its big bet. So to really understand this, we've got to look at how information, or let's call it intelligence, is supposed to move inside a company. But what we'll actually see is how it fails to move. We call this the 3-layer breakdown. Okay, first up, layer 1, intelligence fragmentation. Just imagine for a second that every single department in your company is a sensor, out there picking up critical signals. Your sales team is hearing whispers about a new customer need. Your supply chain folks see a new risk popping up in the South China Sea. Your tech team notices that a competitor's hiring patterns have suddenly changed. All this amazing intelligence, but where does it go? The answer is nowhere. It just stays locked up in its own silo. And the result of that? By the time these little bits and pieces of the puzzle finally trickle up to the strategy team, they're way too late, they're stripped of all their important context, and they're totally disconnected from each other. Nobody is putting them together to see the bigger picture they're all pointing to. It's always an incomplete story. All right, now on to layer 2, and you'll see how the problem gets worse. Isolated scenario planning. The strategy team takes all that fragmented intelligence, they lock themselves in a room for their annual, offsite, and they produce this beautiful PowerPoint deck. And then the process just stops. There's no feedback loop that goes back to the people on the ground. So guess what they do? They stop sending signals. I mean, why would you bother if you never hear anything back? And this is the truly ironic part. The scenario planning process itself accidentally kills the one thing it needs to survive, the flow of intelligence. It stops being a living, breathing decision system and it just becomes a documentation exercise. It's an artifact that proves you did the work, but it doesn't actually do any work. And here's where it all gets very, very human. Layer 3, leadership signal resistance. So let's say, even if you had perfect intelligence flowing into perfect scenarios, you would still smack right into a psychological wall. And why is that? Well, it's because leaders are already running a plan they've committed to. A new signal that says that plan might be wrong, that feels really uncomfortable. That's cognitive dissonance. It brings up all the time and money you've already spent. That's your sunk cost bias. And honestly, changing course is a massive pain. It's just so much easier to keep doing what you're already doing. So what happens in the real world? A leader hears the new signal and says, that's interesting, thanks for flagging. Let's monitor the situation. And with those 3 little words, monitor the situation, the signal gets treated like interesting commentary, not a direct input that requires action. The signal has just been neutralized. It's dead on arrival. So the final, predictable result of this whole 3-layer breakdown is that the entire system fails right at the moment of truth. Even really good scenarios don't trigger decisions. Instead, the organization just waits and waits until the future is no longer a signal, it's a giant wave crashing over them. And at that point, adapting is forced, it's panicked, and it is incredibly expensive. You've completely lost your head start. Okay, so how can you tell if your own organization is caught in this trap?
let's switch gears from explaining the problem to giving you a way to diagnose it. Here are the telltale symptoms of a broken foresight infrastructure. Let's do a quick little self-check. First, are your scenario planning documents literally collecting dust on a shelf or a server somewhere? 2, is your leadership's go-to move always, let's monitor and wait? 3, think about the probabilities you put on your scenarios 6 months ago. Have they ever been updated? And last one, does the money always, no matter what, follow the annual budget instead of the new signals you're seeing? If you found yourself nodding yes to even a couple of these, you don't have an analysis problem. You have an infrastructure problem. All right, enough of the bad news. Let's talk about the solution. Because you can't just try harder at a broken process, you have to build a totally new system. So here is the 5-step fix to make foresight actually drive decisions. So here's how you do it. Step 1, you have to create a central team. And it can be lightweight, whose only job is to gather and connect all those fragmented signals. Step 2, you need explicit governance, like a monthly meeting where you actually review the signals. Step 3, and this is huge, you have to define your scenario trigger points in advance. We'll talk more about that in a sec. Step 4, you embed this thinking into every major decision you make. And finally, step 5, you make foresight everyone's job, not some orphaned function stuck in the strategy department. Let's make this really practical. Let's zoom in on step 3, defining those triggers. Okay, imagine one of your scenarios is geopolitical crisis. You don't just sit around and wait for the headlines to tell you it's happening. No. Instead, you define the leading indicators ahead of time. Things like specific troop movements, or a certain country passing new sanctions, or a change in export controls on a key commodity. When you see those things happen, the scenario's probability officially and automatically goes up. See? It takes all the guesswork and emotion out of it and makes the whole system objective. So you might be thinking, is all this work really worth it? Why go through the trouble of building this whole new system? The answer is simple, because this kind of infrastructure is a massive competitive advantage. It's about building an organization that can actually see the future coming and do something about it faster than anyone else. And look, this isn't just a nice idea. There's data on this. Companies that build this kind of integrated foresight system, they report detecting critical market and geopolitical signals a full 30 to 40% faster than their peers. In the world we live in today, that kind of speed is basically a superpower. Think about it this way. Without this infrastructure, what percentage of your company's major decisions are genuinely informed by your scenarios? I mean, really. In most places, the honest answer pretty much rounds down to 0. It's a strategic rounding error. But with this kind of infrastructure in place, that number jumps to 20 to 30%. Now, just pause and think about that. That means 1/5 to 1/3 of your biggest, most important bets are now being actively shaped by a clear-eyed, data-driven view of the future. That is a complete game changer. And all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most important question you need to take back to your team. Who actually owns foresight in your organization? Because if the answer is, oh, the strategy team handles that, or that's the planning department's job, well, that answer is the problem. Because foresight can't just be one department's job. It has to be the entire organization's operating system. So the ultimate choice your company has to make is this. Is your view of the future an active tool that is driving decisions, or is it just a pretty picture hanging on the wall for decoration?